Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's March 23rd. Today, we celebrate one of America's earliest botanists, and we'll also learn about a fantastic English flower painter who was mentored by Nathaniel Wallach after meeting him in Cape Town. They happened to be staying at the same hotel. We'll hear a little poem about budding trees today, and we grow that garden library with a book about getting back to the basics, growing all the food you need with just 4 hand tools. No fuss, no muss. And then we'll wrap things up with some fun. It's National Chia Day. That's right. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're singing to yourself right now, but we'll get to that later. It's time for today's curated news. Today's curated garden news comes to us from the spruce. And of course, the title is fantastic. It says you should totally be doing the TikTok PlantShaking trend. And this post is by Taylor Fuller. Well, if you haven't heard already, there was a little video that was shared on TikTok, and it showed someone shaking their houseplant. And then this became a trend, and suddenly everybody is doing these little videos where they're shaking their houseplants. And I have to say, hats off to Taylor for writing about this. This was actually in an article that he shared back in the beginning of February. Now, this trend originated on TikTok, and it was started by a woman named Sid Cassidy, where she was shaking her plants to the tune of Twist and Shout. Then there's text that starts to appear on the video, and it asks this question: did you know that gently shaking your houseplants every once in a while stimulates the plant and mimics the wind, blowing it in its natural environment, helping it to grow? Well, needless to say, Sid's video became a sensation on TikTok, and it started getting shared everywhere. I first saw it on Twitter, and the author of this article, Taylor, began to wonder whether or not there was any truth to what Sid was saying in her video. So he asked a variety of people in the plant community. He started out with plant expert Jane Perrone, who said that there was scientific evidence that plants benefit from being touched gently, but she advised not to shake plants too hard because some plants can be easily damaged. And of course, we all know that certain plants, like African violets, do not want to be manhandled. Now, the other thing that I like about what Jane Perrone said is she actually names this phenomenon, and it's actually a very long word. It's thigmomorphogenesis. And here's where Jane actually cites some science that says that plants that were touched regularly actually ended up growing to be less leggy, and they had stouter stems. And then Taylor also asked a Canadian plant influencer by the name of Colby Page, who shares a lot of content over on her Instagram page. And she shared this little interesting tidbit that I thought you would enjoy. Here she's talking about her fiddle leaf fig. And she says, "When my fiddle was small and immature, I needed a wooden dowel to keep it standing straight. Over time, as it grew, and with regular shakings, it was able to strengthen itself, and I was able to remove the dowel, and it now needs no additional support." So there you go, another case for gently shaking your houseplants. You cannot make this stuff up. Well, I tell you what, I have put this article over in the Facebook group for the show. You can easily find it there. All you need to do is head on over to the group and type in the word trend, and then Taylor's post will pop right up. And if you're not in the group, Don't worry about it. You can join at any time. You have a standing invitation. If you do want to join, just keep in mind that it's totally free and that it's a private group. The next time you're on Facebook, just head on up to the search bar and type in the words Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. It's time for today's Botanical History. Here's today's Botanical History for March 23rd. Today is the birthday of one of America's earliest botanists, horticulturists, and explorers, John Bartram, who was born on this day, March 23rd, in 1699. John founded the first botanical garden in America, and Linnaeus called John the greatest natural botanist in the world. Like many botanists of his time, John was born into a Quaker family on a farm in Pennsylvania. And here's how John, who always thought of himself as a farmer first, described the moment that he decided to pursue a career in botany. And I thought you'd get a kick out of this. Here's what he wrote. One day, I was very busy plowing, and being weary, I ran under a tree to repose myself. I cast my eyes on a daisy. I plucked it mechanically and viewed it with more curiosity than common country farmers are wont to do, and observed many distinct parts, some perpendicular, some horizontal. What a shame, said my mind, that you have spent so many years in tilling the earth and destroying so many flowers and plants without being acquainted with their structures and their uses. I thought about it continually at supper, in bed, and wherever I went. And on the fourth day, I hired a man to plow for me, and I went to Philadelphia, though I didn't know what to look for, and I ingeniously told the bookseller my errand, who provided me with a Latin grammar book. Next, I signed up to learn from a neighboring schoolmaster who in 3 months taught me Latin enough to understand Linnaeus. Then I began to botanize all over my farm, and in a little time I became acquainted with every vegetable that grew in the neighborhood. Over the years, I acquired a pretty general knowledge of every plant and tree to be found on our continent. In time, I was contacted by the old countries, where I sent many collections every year. Isn't that fantastic? To think that he wrote that in the early 1700s. Well, John ended up regularly corresponding with the top botanists of his day. And like many of us, he had his preferences when it came to his garden. When he wrote to Philip Miller, who was in charge of the Chelsea Physic Garden in England, he indicated his desire for variety in the garden. He said, 1 or 2 is enough for me of a sort. He didn't want to get like 6 or 10 or a dozen plants of one variety. He was looking for a nice assortment of plants. And back in 2015, John's Garden became an American Society for Horticultural Science landmark. This prestigious award was first presented to Monticello, home of President Thomas Jefferson. Other recipients include Longwood Gardens, the Missouri Botanical Garden, the New York Botanical Garden, the Arnold Arboretum, and the Fairchild Botanical Garden. Now, you may be wondering just how John Bartram's gardens managed to stay preserved all these years. Well, I did too. And it turns out that a man named Andrew McCullough Eastwick bought the 46-acre Bartram estate from John Bartram's granddaughter, Anne Bartram Carr. An engineer and the inventor of the steam shovel, Andrew had banked a personal mint after building railroads for Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. Anyway, when Andrew bought the Bartram property, he made extra sure that John's historic garden was kept intact, and he even vowed not to harm, quote, one bush planted by the Bartrams. Andrew even kept the Bartram family homestead as a memorial, and he built his own mansion beside the Bartrams. Now, for many gardeners, the idea of leaving a much-loved garden is unbearable. But as gardeners, with careful plant selections, we can leave a legacy as well. Planting long-lived perennials like black-eyed Susans, hosta, daffodils, peonies, lilacs, Russian sage, and daylilies all have enormous staying power. And some, like the peony, will likely even outlive us because they can live over 100 years old. And today is the birthday of the English flower painter Arabella Elizabeth Roupell, who was born on this day, March 23rd, in 1817. Arabella joined her husband when he was stationed in South Africa for his work with the East India Company. To occupy herself, Arabella painted the flora and fauna of the Cape. In a complete stroke of luck, the great botanist Nathaniel Wallach happened to be staying at the same hotel in Cape Town. Anyway, Nathaniel saw Arabella's work, and he loved it. The two hit it off, and then he introduced Arabella to a couple, Thomas McClear and his wife, Mary. Then the four of them would go off and botanize together, and Arabella and Mary became lifelong friends. Now, Nathaniel Wallach played a very important role in Arabella's life. After he retired from the Calcutta Botanic Garden, he shared her work with William Jackson Hooker, who also fell in love with Arabella's illustrations. In 1849, these two men paved the way for 10 plates of Arabella's flower paintings to be published in a folio called Specimens of the Flora of South Africa by a Lady. Today, Arabella's book is highly collectible and very difficult to obtain since only around 100 copies were ever printed. And it's on my wish list. It's time for today's Unearthed Words. Today's words come to us from the American poet, essayist, clergyman, and mystic Jones Very from his poem called The Tree. Here's an excerpt. I love thee when thy swelling buds appear, and one by one their tender leaves unfold, as if they knew that warmer suns were near, nor longer sought to hide from winter's cold. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Gardening When It Counts by Steve Solomon. This book came out in 2006, and the subtitle is Growing Food in Hard Times. In this book, Steve shares everything you need to know to get growing organically, such as how to make and tend a garden, start composting, select seeds, and grow whatever your heart desires. Steve provides his hard-won wisdom as a gardener and a nurseryman, and he shares his own stories of gardening, saving seeds, growing what you'd like to eat, and then paying attention to what grows well in your garden. That's key. This book is 360 pages of solid garden information from a man who writes with humor and wisdom. You can get a copy of Gardening When It Counts by Steve Solomon and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $11. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is National Chia Day. And I know what you're probably thinking right now, or should I say singing. It's likely the little earworm that we all remember from the 1980s. Ch-ch-ch-chia. Well, anyway, who knew that those little clay pot chia pets would still be top sellers all these years later, and that the chia seed would become known as a superfood? And by the way, it's worth mentioning that every year 500,000 chia pets are sold as novelties in the United States. And they didn't even have to appear on Shark Tank. Now, historically, both the Mayans and the Aztecs used chia medicinally, and they recognized the ability for chia to heal and provide energy. And the etymology of the word chia is derived from the Aztec word chian, meaning oily. Chia seeds are actually very bland. They're virtually tasteless, which makes them easy to add to any recipe to add a nutrient boost. And gardeners might be surprised to know that the chia seed actually comes from an herb, a salvia plant, Salvia hispanica. And this plant was originally named by Linnaeus. And today, he would be stunned to learn that the chia seed market is worth $4.7 billion. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. Hey, thanks for spending part of your day with The Daily Gardener. If you want to read even more botanical brevities, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. That's where you can find all the stories, biographies, and books that I share on the show. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. It has lots of goodies in it, and I try to make the newsletter like you're getting a marvelous letter from a garden friend. You can always find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Twitter, and you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can easily share your gardener greetings or book submissions by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove in Wyoming, Minnesota, with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, and Eric Begay. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.